into the forgotten corners of the past. Tonight's story drifts back to a time when life was not easy, when every breath was a small victory against the wild world itself. This is the story of why life was brutal for the ancient Maya. As you settle in and let your mind slow down, imagine the jungle around you, humid, alive, endless. The Maya civilization rose from this green ocean of leaves, a people who built temples that reached for the heavens and carved their histories in stone. Yet, behind their glory and precision, their calendars and art, there was a daily struggle for survival. Beneath the dense and shimmering canopy of the Central American jungle, where the air hung thick with the scent of rain-soaked earth, the Maya built their world with patience, devotion, and endurance. The forest was alive in every direction, roots tangled like serpents, shadows hiding the slow movements of jaguars, and the distant roar of howler monkeys echoing through the green labyrinth. In this humid heart of Mesoamerica, the Maya carved cities from limestone and raised temples toward the sky, their stairways catching the light of dawn. Yet behind that beauty, life was a constant negotiation between man and nature. The soil could feed them, but only for a season before exhaustion claimed it. Rains would come in violent bursts and then vanish for months, leaving fields cracked and brittle. Maize was their lifeblood, their sacred crop, and when it failed, hunger stalked their villages like a silent spirit. To understand the heavens, they studied the stars, crafted calendars that foretold the cycles of time, and believed that the gods who ruled those cycles demanded balance, offerings, rituals, and sometimes blood. Still, their lives were humble. Families rose before the first light, grinding maize on stone, weaving cloth, and whispering small prayers that the day would be kind. Each sound of the forest, each rustle, each call was a reminder of how fragile life could be. Even the greatest cities, like Tikal and Palenque, were swallowed again and again by the same jungle that had yielded to human hands. The forest was patient, reclaiming temples and palaces in silence, wrapping its roots around their stones until only whispers remained. But within that endless struggle, the Maya found meaning. They were astronomers and artists, mathematicians and mystics, reading the sky and shaping the earth with reverence. When dusk settled and the crickets began their nightly song, the glow of small fires shimmered across the darkness like fallen stars on the forest floor. Families gathered, eating simple meals, listening to stories of creation, of gods who shaped men from corn and breathed life into clay, of heroes who descended into darkness to bring back light. These stories gave them comfort and purpose, a quiet faith that even suffering was part of the divine order. Beneath the canopy of time, they endured, their hearts beating in rhythm with the breathing forest around them. Their legacy written not only in stone, but in the eternal whisper of leaves that still remember their name. Each morning in the Maya world began with the same soft light spilling over the horizon, filtering through mist and trees before touching the stone faces of temples that had waited all night in silence. The people would rise before the sun fully woke, before the first bird had finished its song. Smoke from cooking fires would curl upward through the still air, carrying the scent of maize and ash. For the Maya, the sun was not just a light in the sky, it was life itself, a god whose strength demanded both gratitude and fear. They called him Kinich Ahau, the radiant Lord, the one whose journey across the heavens marked the rhythm of time. Each day he rose to look down upon the people, watching their labor, testing their endurance beneath his burning gaze. The farmers bowed to him in the fields, their backs glistening with sweat as they tended to the sacred triad of maize, beans, and squash crops that were both gift and curse. The work was endless, clearing the land, planting, tending, harvesting, all under the weight of a heat that seemed to shimmer even in the shade. Yet to live was to work, and to work was to honor the gods. As the sun climbed higher, its light glared from the pale limestone of temples, so bright that even the air seemed to vibrate. The Maya had mastered the cycles of the seasons, charting the path of the sun with astonishing precision. Their great calendar, the Hab, and the sacred Soken intertwined like gears in the machinery of the cosmos. Every ceremony, every harvest, every war and coronation was timed according to the will of the heavens. They believed that if they ever lost this balance, if they failed to honor the divine rhythm, darkness and drought would devour their world. So they lived in constant awareness of time, as though every passing hour carried a spiritual weight. When droughts came, as they often did, the fields turned to dust, and the rivers thinned to streams of mud. Families watched their crops wither, their children grow thin, and they prayed with trembling voices to the gods who ruled the rain and sun alike. Sometimes, in desperate seasons, rulers called for rituals meant to restore harmony, offerings of incense, of food, and sometimes of blood. It was not cruelty, but devotion, a sacrifice made to remind the heavens that humans still remembered their place in the order of creation. To the Maya, blood was life, the bridge between the mortal and the divine. Kings would pierce their tongues or ears with obsidian blades, letting their blood fall onto paper and burn it in fire, the smoke carrying their devotion to the sky. And through it all, the people continued their work, day after day, under the same merciless light. As the afternoon faded and shadows grew long, the jungle began to breathe again, the air cooling, the birds returning to the trees. The people would gather their baskets and return home, weary but peaceful, knowing that they had done their part in the eternal dance between man and the sun. And as night fell, when the last glimmer of Kinich Ahau sank behind the horizon, they would look toward the west and whisper quiet words of thanks. For tomorrow, if the sun returned, life would continue, and if it did not, then the gods had chosen silence. In the Maya world, even exhaustion was sacred, and every sunrise was a promise renewed through suffering and faith. In the cities of the ancient Maya, where stone pyramids rose like mountains from the green sea of the jungle, life revolved around power, faith, and the divine order that bound heaven and earth together. The Maya did not see their kings as ordinary men. They were the chosen ones, living bridges between the mortal and the divine, the vessels through which the gods spoke to the people. Their blood was sacred, their breath touched by the heavens, and every ceremony they led was believed to maintain the fragile balance of the cosmos. From the moment of dawn, when sunlight touched the tallest temple spires, the city would awaken to the sound of conch shells and drums, signals that another ritual was about to begin. Priests in elaborate feathered garments would climb the steps of the great pyramids, their faces painted with sacred colors of red and black, the hues of blood and night. his hands he might hold a burning torch or a blade of obsidian, sharp enough to draw his own blood. To the Maya, sacrifice was not cruelty, it was creation. They believed the gods had bled to form the world, and so humanity must return that gift to keep life flowing. The king's pain became a prayer, his blood the ink that renewed the covenant between heaven and earth. Around him stood nobles and priests, their roles fixed by birth and tradition, each bound to the service of the divine. But beneath the grandeur of ceremony, the weight of this order pressed heavily on the common people, the farmers, builders, and craftsmen who filled the cities and villages, carried stones for temples, wove cloth for nobles, and offered their labor as tribute to sustain the sacred elite. Their days were filled with toil, their nights with the quiet hope that their gods would be merciful. They accepted their place as part of the divine pattern, a living hierarchy that mirrored the cosmos itself. The heavens had layers, the underworld had depths, and so too did society. Above all stood the divine ruler. Beneath him, the nobles and priests. Below them, the countless hands that built and fed the world. Yet the Maya were not merely subjects to their kings. They were participants in a grand cosmic ritual that defined existence itself. Every festival, every market day, every funeral and birth carried ritual meaning. When the drums echoed across the plazas, when the smoke of incense rose in lazy spirals toward the sky, the people felt themselves connected to their ancestors, to their gods, and to the endless wheel of time that turned above them. The Maya believed the universe had been created and destroyed not once, but many times, and that human devotion was the thread holding it together. Even the glyphs carved into temple walls were prayers, stories of rulers who sought to become eternal through remembrance. In the flicker of torchlight, their faces carved in stone seemed alive, their eyes staring through the centuries, unblinking and wise. And as night fell over the city, the stars appeared, bright, ordered, familiar. The same stars their astronomers watched, the same heavens their kings claimed as their birthright. The people would lie beneath that endless sky, tired from their day's work, listening to the distant sound of drums fading into the jungle, comforted by the thought that they were part of something vast and eternal, something that would outlive even the mightiest of kings. In that quiet darkness, the Maya world breathed as one, a living prayer, bound together by faith, fear, and the eternal promise of the gods above. Beneath the grand temples and shining plazas of the Maya cities lay a quieter world, the world of those whose hands carried the stones, whose sweat darkened the soil, whose backs bore the weight of an empire. The lives of the common Maya were lives of labor and faith intertwined. Days that began before sunrise and ended long after dusk. They built the temples whose names they would never know, carved the gods they would never touch, and grew the food that sustained the kings who ruled from above. Their houses were made of mud and thatch, clustered together in small communities around the edges of great cities, where smoke from cooking fires curled lazily into the morning air. The sound of stone being cut and maize being ground blended into a rhythm as steady as the beating of a heart, the heartbeat of a civilization. For every monument that rose toward the sky, there were countless lives hidden in its shadow. The builders labored under the sun, their hands raw and calloused, carrying heavy limestone blocks through narrow jungle paths, guided only by wooden rollers was slow, punishing work, but it was sacred. Each stone lifted, each wall raised, was an offering to the gods. The Maya did not separate work from worship. To toil was to honor creation. In the fields, farmers bent low among rows of maize, whispering prayers as they worked. Women wove cloth dyed with brilliant colors, their fingers moving with a grace learned over generations. Children fetched water, tended fires, and listened to their elders tell stories of the old gods, the serpent lords, the rain bringers, the ones who shaped the world from mud and corn. Though life was hard, it was full of meaning. The Maya saw themselves as part of a divine order, their lives threads in a tapestry too vast to comprehend. Yet hunger was a constant shadow. When the rains failed, crops withered, and famine crept silently through the villages. Parents would ration food, saving the last handfuls of maize for the smallest children, whispering that the gods were only testing them. Disease, too, was an unseen enemy. Fevers born of the jungle, infections from wounds, illnesses that came and went with the seasons. Still, the people endured, bound by family, faith, and the rhythm of life that had continued unchanged for centuries. The priests said that to suffer was to pay a debt to the gods, that every hardship drew humanity closer to the divine, and so they accepted their struggles with quiet dignity. Festivals brought brief moments of joy, music made from drums and bone flutes, dancing in the flickering light of torches, laughter echoing against the stone walls of the plazas. For a few nights, the weight of the world seemed lighter. But when the fires burned out and silence returned, the people went back to their endless work, building a civilization whose glory would one day crumble and fade beneath the vines. Even in their anonymity, there was greatness. The hands that shaped the stones of Tikal and Copan may be forgotten, but their work still stands, their effort immortalized in silence. When one walks through those ruins today, through corridors swallowed by moss, beneath walls where trees grow from cracks in the stone, one can almost hear them still, the quiet murmur of voices, the scrape of tools, the soft rhythm of a people who built their world one breath, one prayer, one heartbeat at a time. Their struggle beneath the stone was not in vain. It was the very foundation of eternity. There came a time when the prayers of the Maya seemed to rise into an empty sky. The rains stopped coming, the rivers shrank into thin threads of mud, and the great fields of maize turned pale beneath the relentless sun. The people looked to their kings and priests for answers, but even the sacred fires that once danced with life now flickered weakly in the dry wind. The temples, once filled with the scent of burning copal and the sound of drums, became heavy with silence. This was the age when the gods fell quiet. The droughts came not for days, nor for seasons, but for generations. Forests that once sang with birds grew still, and the air filled with dust instead of mist. Crops failed again and again, and the great cities, Tikal, Copan, Kalakmel, began to crumble under their own weight. Hunger gnawed at the edges of civilization, forcing people to leave their homes and wander in search of water and soil that would still yield life. The jungles, patient and eternal, began to reclaim what was once taken from them. Vines crawled up the sides of temples. Roots split the stones that had stood for centuries. In the plazas where kings once walked, trees began to grow, their branches stretching toward the heavens as if to take the place of the gods who no longer answered. Some say the rulers, desperate to restore favor, turned to darker rituals. Sacrifices multiplied, blood filled the altars, and still the sky refused to weep. The belief that had once united them began to fracture. The calendars, once so precise, seemed meaningless when the stars offered no guidance. The sacred cities emptied, their walls echoing only with the whispers of wind and memory. Yet, even as their world collapsed, the Maya spirit did not vanish. The people carried their traditions into the hills and forests, away from the fallen cities. They continued to speak the old words, to tell the old stories, to honor the same gods, even if those gods no longer spoke back. Time, they believed, was a wheel that turned endlessly, and perhaps one day the gods would awaken again. And so they waited. The forest closed around their temples, sealing them away like secrets, preserving them in shadow until the modern world would one day find them again. Centuries passed, and the jungle grew thick and loud once more. The birds returned. The rain came back. The gods, if they were ever truly gone, seemed to breathe again through the wind in the trees. Today, when you stand among the ruins, beneath the towering ceiba trees and the calls of unseen creatures, it is hard not to feel their presence, not the noise of a fallen empire, but the quiet heartbeat of a people who refuse to disappear. The Maya never truly ended. They changed, survived, adapted. Their descendants still walk the same earth, still plant the same maize, still speak the same ancient tongue that once filled the air between stone temples and jungle skies. In the stillness of night, when the rain falls softly over the ruins, you can almost hear the echo of their prayers returning home, a reminder that even when gods fall silent, humanity endures. The story of the Maya is not only one of greatness and ruin, but of resilience, of faith that outlives the storms, of people who learned that even in silence. When the night fell over the Maya world, it was as if the heavens opened their eyes. The jungle, which had roared and whispered through the day, grew quiet beneath the weight of 1,000 stars. The people looked upward, beyond the canopy, beyond the smoke of their small fires, and saw the vast order of the universe stretching endlessly above them. To the Maya, the sky was not merely a backdrop to their lives. It was the map of existence itself. Each point of light was alive with meaning. Each movement of a planet, each flicker of a star, was a message from the gods. The Milky Way, arching across the darkness like a river of light, was known to them as the path of souls, the celestial road between life and death, where the spirits of ancestors and deities traveled. The priests, cloaked in feathers and smoke, spent their nights in silent observation, their eyes tracing the paths of Venus, the sun's twin and the bringer of omens. They kept careful records on bark paper codices, calculating eclipses and solstices with astonishing precision. Their calendars, carved into stone, reflected a universe in motion, a sacred machinery where time itself was divine. The Maya did not separate science from faith. For them, astronomy was worship. To understand the heavens was to understand the will of the gods. Every ceremony, every festival, every coronation of a king aligned with the stars above. When Venus appeared in the morning sky, warriors prepared for battle. When it vanished, they rested. The moon's cycles guided their rituals. The sun's journey marked the rhythm of planting and shining through doorways designed to capture a single moment of cosmic perfection. These were not coincidences, but prayers made stone. High atop their temples, priests burned incense that rose into the night like thin silver rivers, offering the scent of copal to the gods of the sky. The people below knelt in the plazas, faces lifted to the stars, feeling the invisible thread that connected them to the cosmos. They believed their ancestors watched from those distant lights, that the gods could read their hearts through the smoke and song that rose from the earth. It was a world where every breath and every shadow carried meaning. And yet, for all their knowledge, there remained mystery. The stars could guide, but they could also deceive. They could promise rain and deliver drought. The gods who lived among them were wise, but also demanding. Their silence sometimes more powerful than their presence. Still, the Maya did not turn away. They listened. They waited. In the quiet hours before dawn, when the jungle was still and only the crackle of fire broke the silence, the priests whispered to the heavens, asking for signs, for mercy, for understanding. Above them, the constellations moved as they always had, patient and eternal. For the Maya, the sky was not far away. It was a mirror reflecting the order of their own souls. To live was to move with the stars, to breathe with the universe, to accept that life and death were simply different moments in the same endless rhythm. And as the fires burned low and sleep came upon the villages, the stars continued their slow, graceful dance, shining for those who dreamed beneath them, whispering stories of gods, of time, and of forever. In the world of the Maya, the gods were everywhere, in the wind that stirred the leaves, in the fire that warmed the night, in the rain that fell upon the waiting earth. To live was to dwell among spirits, both kind and cruel, beings who shaped every part of existence and demanded respect in return. The Maya did not imagine a distant heaven where their deities rested. Their gods were near, their presence woven into every stone, every drop of water, every heartbeat. There was Itsamna, the great creator, who shaped the heavens and taught mankind the wisdom of writing and knowledge. There was Chak, the god of rain, whose acts of lightning split the sky and whose tears brought life to the thirsty soil. When the air grew heavy and clouds gathered over the jungle, the people would turn their faces upward and whisper his name, begging for his mercy. In the crack of thunder, they heard his voice. In the scent of wet earth, they felt his blessing. There was also Kukulkan, the feathered serpent, who descended from the sky as both storm and spirit, bringing renewal and destruction in equal measure. His image was carved into the stairways of temples, his stone body catching the light at equinox, as though he truly slithered down from the heavens to meet the people who worshipped him. The Maya believed the world was born not once, but many times, created and destroyed in cycles that mirrored the rise and fall of kingdoms, the coming and going of seasons, and the lives of men. Each new world was born from sacrifice, a divine exchange that tied blood and creation together. The gods had bled to form the sun and stars, and so humanity was bound to return that gift. Every offering of food, of incense, of song was a reminder of that sacred debt. But when the world grew silent, when the rains refused to come, or the stars shone strangely, the Maya believed the gods were displeased. In those moments, the priests would climb the temple steps, their faces painted with the colors of life and death, and light fires to call the gods back. Smoke rose restore balance to the world. These acts were not born of fear alone, but of faith, a deep understanding that life was fragile and that the universe was held together by the careful exchange between mortal and God. The people lived in gratitude, aware that every harvest, every drop of water, every sunrise was a gift that could be taken away. Even death was not the end, but a continuation, a passage into another layer of existence, watched over by new gods. The Maya underworld, Xibalba, was not a place of eternal torment, but of chalos and transformation, where souls faced trials to prove their strength before returning to the stars. To the Maya, existence itself was sacred, an endless conversation between creation and destruction, between man and the divine. And as they stood beneath the rolling clouds, or beside fires that cracked and hissed, they did not see chaos. They saw life vast and eternal, reflected in the rhythm of rain, the shimmer of firelight, and the whispering wind that carried the voices of their gods. The temples of the Maya rose from the heart of the jungle like mountains built by human hands, their stone faces carved with the stories of gods, kings, and time itself. To those who approached them, they were more than mere buildings. They were living beings, breathing symbols of the connection between earth and sky. Each temple was built with intention, aligned with the sun, the stars, and the cycles of the heavens. When the dawn broke over the canopy, light would fall across their steps in perfect precision, as if the gods themselves had drawn the plans. These moments of alignment were not accidents, but prayers made real. The shadow of the feathered serpent slithering down the pyramid at Chichen Itza during the equinox, the rays of the rising sun piercing through narrow doorways to touch sacred altars deep within the stone. The Maya believed the universe was made of layers, each connected by invisible pathways of spirit and energy, and the temples stood as bridges between them. Priests climbed their steps to speak to the gods, carrying offerings of food, jade, and incense, their chants echoing across the plazas below. From the top, the entire world seemed to stretch endlessly, jungle rolling to the horizon, rivers like ribbons of silver, and the distant call of birds blending with the sound of wind moving through the trees. It was said that from such heights, one could hear the voices of ancestors carried on the air. The common people gathered below during festivals, their faces lifted to watch the ceremonies unfold. Fires burned in clay bowls, musicians played drums and flutes, dancers moved in slow circles, wearing masks of jaguars, birds, and gods. The air shimmered with heat and devotion. These were moments when the boundary between the mortal and the divine grew thin, when the world seemed to breathe as one. Yet, within the same stone that caught the light, there were shadows, cool chambers hidden deep inside the pyramids, where few ever entered. There, in the silence of torchlight, priests performed the most secret rituals. The walls were painted with red and black, symbols of death and rebirth spiraling around them. Offerings were left in bowls of jade and obsidian, sometimes bones, sometimes jewels, each meant to maintain the fragile balance of the cosmos. The Maya understood that light could not exist without darkness, that every sunrise was born from the night. Their temples reflected this belief, grand above ground, mysterious below, filled with echoes of life and death intertwined. When the sun set, the pyramids glowed with the last touch before fading into silhouettes against the twilight. As night fell, the stars appeared once more above them, perfectly aligned with the structures below, as if the heavens were mirroring the cities of men. It was said that the gods looked down and saw their own reflection in these temples, the shining stairways of the sky meeting the sacred stones of the earth. Even now, centuries later, when the jungle has swallowed many of these cities, the alignment remains. The stars still rise where the Maya placed them, and the light still falls upon their temples as it did long ago. In the stillness of those ruins, one can feel the same quiet reverence, the heartbeat of a people who built not for a moment, but for eternity, capturing the dance of light and shadow in every stone they laid. Among the many gifts the Maya gave the world, none was more extraordinary than their mastery of time. To them, time was not a straight path, but a living circle, endless, repeating, breathing. They did not see the past as gone or the future as unknown. Both existed together, turning like gears in a great cosmic machine. The Maya believed that everything, the birth of a child, the fall of a king, the rise of a city, even the movement of the stars, happened according to cycles that had been written long before the world began. Their priests, known as the keepers of time, were the guardians of this sacred order. They studied the heavens with patient devotion, watching the stars and the shadows, recording their movements in codices made of bark and lime. Every flicker of Venus, every eclipse of the sun, every phase of the moon was written down and interpreted as the voice of the gods. To most people, time was a mystery. To the Maya, it was a language, and the keepers of time were its translators. They used several calendars, each with its own rhythm. The Soken, a sacred 260-day cycle tied to ritual and prophecy, and the Hab, a 365-day solar year marking the turn of seasons. Together, they formed the calendar round, a great wheel that connected the divine and the earthly, the predictable and the mysterious. But there was another, greater count, the long count, which reached across centuries, marking the vast ages of creation itself. It told not just when people were born or when crops should be planted, but when the gods had built and destroyed entire worlds. The keepers believed that humanity lived within the fourth world, and that even this too would one day end, just as the others before it had fallen into darkness. Yet there was no fear in this belief, only acceptance, for in their eyes, endings were only beginnings, seen from another side. The keepers of time walked softly among their people, carrying carved staffs and scrolls marked with sacred numbers. They advised kings, guided builders, and decided when the great festivals should be held. To defy the calendar was to defy the gods. And so, when the priests announced the arrival of a new cycle, cities erupted in celebration. Fires blazed through the night, dancers filled the plazas, and offerings were made to mark the turning of the world once more. To the Maya, every day had a spirit, every number a soul, every moment a purpose. Time was alive, breathing alongside them, whispering in the rustle of leaves and the rhythm of drums. Even today, the descendants of the Maya still keep parts of that ancient count, still mark the sacred days with offerings of corn, flowers, and smoke. The great wheel continues to turn, as it always has, reminding those who listen that they are part of something far older and far greater than themselves. When you stand beneath the stars and think of time stretching endlessly behind and Every breath, every heartbeat finds its place. To the Maya, the end of all things was never truly an end. It was merely another breath in the long rhythm of the cosmos, another turning of the wheel that never stopped. They believed the universe itself had been born and destroyed many times before, each age rising like the sun and falling like the night. The gods created humanity from clay, from wood, and finally from maize, and each time the world was remade, refined, brought closer to balance. This understanding of endless renewal gave meaning to everything they did. The Maya did not fear the passing of days, the fall of kings, or the crumbling of their cities, for they knew that even ruin was sacred. When a temple fell, its stones returned to the earth from which they came. When a life ended, its spirit joined the ancestors among the stars. All things, they believed, would one day return, not as they were, but as something new. The eternal return was the heart of Maya philosophy, a promise written in the stars, carved in their calendars, and whispered in their prayers. The keepers of time taught that every great cycle, every katan, carried the echoes of those that came before. The same struggles, the same triumphs, the same lessons, all repeated in different forms, so that humanity could learn and evolve within the divine pattern. The Maya found comfort in this repetition. They saw beauty in impermanence, wisdom in decay, and hope in the endless continuity of life. During great ceremonies, when the old calendar ended and a new one began, the cities came alive with fire and sound. Thousands gathered in the plazas as priests lifted torches toward the heavens, declaring the dawn of a new era. The air shimmered with smoke and chanting. Drums beat like the pulse of the earth. It was both an ending and a beginning, the death of one world and the birth of another. In those moments, the Maya felt closest to the gods, standing at the edge of time itself. And when the fires finally burned low and silence returned, the people felt renewed, as though the world had been washed clean once again. Even as their civilization began to fade into the embrace of the jungle that belief endured. The temples may have fallen, the cities may have been lost to vines and shadows, but the cycle continued. The descendants of the Maya still live upon the same land, plant the same maize, and speak the same words that once filled the air of those ancient cities. Time, for them, has never stopped. The same sun rises over the same hills, the same stars cross the sky, and the same spirits watch over the world from above. The eternal return reminds us that no civilization truly vanishes, it transforms, leaving behind echoes for those who come after. When you walk through the ruins of Tikal or gaze at the serpent shadow of Chichen Itza, you are part of that same cycle, standing in the footprints of those who once watched the heavens with wonder. The stones may be silent, but their silence hums with memory of hands that built, hearts that prayed, and minds that understood that everything in existence, from stars to souls, is destined to return. And as the night stretches once more over the jungle, the stars above whisper their timeless truth. Nothing is ever lost, only changed, only reborn, again and again, forever. Beneath the golden sun and within the echoing plazas of the Maya cities stood rulers who claimed descent from the gods themselves. Their thrones, carved from stone and adorned with the faces of serpents, jaguars, and eagles, were more than seats The people saw their rulers as chosen vessels, born beneath sacred stars, destined to maintain the fragile balance of the cosmos. From the moment of their birth, these royal children were surrounded by ritual. Priests studied the heavens to read the omens in the sky, while midwives whispered prayers to the gods of life and destiny. As they grew, they were taught not only the arts of governance and war, but the secrets of time, the language of glyphs, and the rituals that bound their souls to the divine. When they ascended to the throne, the ceremony was an act of cosmic renewal. The king did not simply rule. He became the living embodiment of the gods who created the world. Draped in quetzal feathers and jade, he stood before his people as both man and symbol. His words carried the weight of prophecy, his actions the force of divine will. Yet, power among the Maya was never gentle. Behind the beauty of their temples and the harmony of their calendars lay a constant struggle between rival cities, between priests and kings, between the will of man and the favor of the gods. The rulers of Tikal, Calakmul, Palenque, and countless others waged wars not only for territory, but for prestige and spiritual dominance. Victory in battle was proof of divine favor. Defeat was a sign that the gods had turned away. Captured kings were paraded through foreign plazas, their ornaments stripped, their pride broken, their fate sealed upon the steps of foreign temples. Even in triumph, rulers knew their power was temporary. The gods who gave could just as easily take away. To maintain balance, they turned to ritual, to the offering of blood and sacrifice that renewed the covenant between heaven and earth. It was said that when a king shed his blood upon the altar, the gods heard and smiled, granting the world another turn of the sun. For the Maya, rule was not privilege, but responsibility, a sacred burden carried with dignity and fear. And as night fell over their cities, with torches flickering against the stone walls and drums echoing like thunder in the distance, the king would stand upon his pyramid and look out over the dark jungle, knowing that his reign, like all things, was bound to time. The stars that had marked his birth would one day mark his end, and another would rise to take his place. Power in the world of the Maya was never owned. It was borrowed from the gods to be returned in blood, in faith, and in silence. When dawn broke over the jungles of the Maya world, it revealed not only temples and cities of beauty, but lands forever scarred by conflict. The great Maya kingdoms, though united by belief and bloodline, were often locked in endless rivalries. Wars fought not for conquest alone, but for honor, prestige, and the favor of the gods. Each city-state was like a shining jewel amid the green sea of the forest, independent and proud, ruled by kings who saw themselves as divine heirs of creation. And yet, beneath the grandeur of their plazas and pyramids, the drums of war beat ceaselessly. Battles were not fought in the shadows, but beneath the blazing sun, witnessed by the heavens themselves. Warriors adorned their bodies with paint, feathers, and obsidian blades, transforming themselves into living symbols of jaguars, eagles, and serpents. They marched through the jungle with chants that echoed like thunder, their steps heavy upon the earth that had seen countless wars before. But the Maya concept of battle was unlike that of distant empires. To kill was not the only goal. To capture was far more sacred. A captured enemy, especially one of noble blood, was a living offering, a soul worthy of the gods. When two armies clash was fierce and fast, obsidian blades flashing in the sunlight, the air filled with shouts, the thrum of drums, and the sharp whistle of arrows. Dust and sweat mixed with the scent of burning copal as the warriors fought, not merely for victory, but for cosmic balance. When the battle ended, silence fell heavy. The victors carried their captives back to the city, parading them through the streets to prove the might of their gods. The festivals that followed were filled with both celebration and sorrow. The people rejoiced, drums beat deep into the night, and fires burned bright upon the temples. But for the captives, it was the beginning of a sacred journey. They were treated not as prisoners, but as messengers to the divine, chosen to cross the boundary between worlds. Their blood would renew the bond between the heavens and the earth, ensuring rain, fertility, and peace. To the Maya, this was not cruelty, but cosmic duty. The balance of creation depended on it. And so, as the priests prepared the altars and the torches flickered in the wind, the rulers prayed that the gods would once again look kindly upon their people. From the terraces above, the king watched, his heart heavy with the weight of both victory and sacrifice. He knew that the strength of his city rested not only in his armies, but in the harmony he maintained between blood and belief. As the sun set, its red light spilling across the stone walls, the jungle seemed to hold its breath. The cries of parrots faded, and the world fell still, as though waiting for the gods to answer. In those moments, the Maya understood that every war was not just a struggle between men, but a reflection of the eternal struggle that shaped the universe: life against death, order against chaos, light against darkness. And when night finally fell, the stars returned to their place above the silent cities, shining down upon the victors and the fallen alike, indifferent and eternal. Their cold light washing the jungle in peace once more. In the Maya world, blood was more than life. It was the bridge between the mortal and the divine, the sacred thread that tied humanity to the gods. Every drop carried meaning, every offering maintained the fragile harmony that held the cosmos together. To the Maya, creation itself was born of sacrifice. The gods had given their own essence to form the sun, the moon, and the beating hearts of men. In return, humanity owed them the same gift. The ritual of blood was therefore not a symbol of cruelty, but of communion, a conversation between heaven and earth, spoken in the oldest language known to existence. In the soft glow of torchlight, within the shadowed courtyards of temples, priests and nobles gathered to perform this most solemn duty. Incense rose in twisting ribbons, filling the air with the sweet scent of copal. The flicker of flame reflected off polished jade and golden ornaments as the drums beat a slow, steady rhythm, the pulse of the earth itself. The ruler, draped in feathers and carved jewelry, would take his place at the center of the ceremony, his expression calm, his movements deliberate. Using thorns of stingray spine or obsidian blades sharpened to glass, he would pierce his flesh, often the tongue, the ears, or the palm, allowing the blood to fall upon strips of bark paper. These offerings were then burned, the smoke rising into the night sky as a direct message to the gods. The people below watched in silence, their faith deep and unwavering. They believed that through this act, the boundaries of the worlds thinned, and the voices of the gods could once again be heard. Sometimes, the queen too would join in, her own offering joining that of her husband, symbolizing symbolizing unity between male and female, between the sun and the moon. The priests would chant in ancient tongues, their words echoing through the stone corridors and out into the jungle beyond. The ritual of blood was not an act of despair, but of renewal. Through pain came power. Through sacrifice came creation. It reminded the people that life was fleeting, that everything they loved existed only because of the balance between giving and taking. And when greater favor was needed for rain, for victory, for the survival of the kingdom, the rituals grew grander. Captured warriors, seen as honored messengers, were offered to the gods in ceremonies that filled the plazas with smoke and sound. Though modern eyes see only the darkness of these acts, the Maya saw light in them, the promise that the world would continue, that crops would grow, that the sun would rise again. As the final chants faded and the fires burned low, the people bowed their heads in prayer, the air thick with incense and silence. Above, the stars shimmered faintly through the drifting smoke, as if watching in solemn approval. To the Maya, blood was not death. It was life returned to its source. And as dawn approached, painting the temples in gold, the people felt a deep peace settle over them. The gods had been fed, the balance restored, and for another day, the world would turn in harmony with the heavens. In the shimmering heat of the Maya world, kings were never seen simply as men. They were living symbols, half human and half divine, wearing the faces of gods so that the people might glimpse eternity through them. Every public appearance, every gesture, every word they spoke was part of a grand performance written in the language of myth. When a ruler stepped onto the temple platform, the crowd below fell silent. For what they saw was not the man himself, but the mask he wore. A mask carved from jade, painted with cinnabar, inlaid with shells that caught the light like stars. These masks were not disguises, but transformations. They allowed a mortal body to hold divine presence, to bridge the endless space between heaven and earth. The king who wore one became Itzamna, or Kukulkan, or Chak. His breath was the breath of creation, his gaze the watchful eye of the sun. Behind these sacred faces, however, the kings were still human, men of ambition, fear, and doubt. They carried the weight of their people upon their shoulders, knowing that every famine, every drought, every war would be seen as a reflection of their worth in the eyes of the gods. The ceremonies that crowned them were acts of rebirth. On the day of accession, the ruler would enter the temple as a man and emerge as a god, his head adorned with a headdress taller than his body, heavy with feathers of quetzal and macaw. Drums pounded, conch shells roared, and the air vibrated with the rhythm of eternity. The mask was placed upon his face in silence, sealing his transformation. Through it, he spoke to the people, not as himself, but as the divine made flesh. Yet, when the crowds dispersed and the torches dimmed, the king would remove the mask and stare into the still water of a jade basin. Seeing both his reflection and the god's face mingled together. In those moments, he might have wondered which one was real, the man or the myth. The Maya believed that the ruler's mask held power even when not worn. It was kept in sacred chambers, guarded by priests, its hollow eyes watching over the city through the cycles of the sun. When a king died, the mask was placed upon his face once more so that he might travel into the afterlife as the god he had embodied in life. Buried with jade beads and carved bones, he would rest with in stone tombs deep beneath the temples he had built, surrounded by murals of his victories and the endless turning of time. Above him, life continued. The people planted, prayed, and celebrated beneath the same sun that had once gleamed on his crown. The mask became memory, the memory became legend, and the legend became eternal. Even now, when archaeologists uncover those jade faces from the dust of centuries, they seem alive, their eyes gleaming with the same quiet authority that once ruled the world. In their expression lies both beauty and sorrow, the weight of kingship, the solitude of power, the mystery of a civilization that saw no line between God and man. The masks of the kings remind us that all power is borrowed, that every crown hides a human heart beneath its shine, and that behind every godlike image there stands a fragile soul seeking to hold the world together for just one more turn of the sun. In the end, even the mightiest of kings could not command the stars. The thrones of the Maya, once gleaming with jade and echoing with chants, began to crumble beneath the slow weight of time. The world they had built, the temples that scraped the sky, the cities that pulsed with life, the rituals that bound heaven and earth, all began to fade into silence. No one could point to the single day it began, for decline does not arrive like a storm. It creeps quietly through droughts that last too long, through crops that wither beneath the merciless sun, through wars that never truly end. The kings prayed for rain, cutting their own flesh in desperation, offering blood to the gods who once answered with thunder. But the sky grew silent. Rivers shrank into dust. The jungle turned dry, and famine walked among the people like a ghost. The divine authority of the rulers faltered. For if the gods no longer listened, what power could a king hold? City turned against city. Allies became enemies, and the sacred balance that had kept their world alive began to fracture. The great centers, Tikal, Kalakmel, Copan, Dalich, had their day of glory, and each fell into shadow. The temples were abandoned, their stairways swallowed by vines. The plazas that once roared with drums and voices grew still, their stones cracked beneath roots and rain. The kings who had ruled with masks of jade and crowns of feathers became dust, their names fading from the glyphs carved in stone. And yet, even as the thrones fell, the people endured. The farmers still planted maize, whispering prayers to the old gods. The potters still shaped clay with care. The children still learned the stories of their ancestors beneath the starlit sky. The Maya world did not end, it changed. The kings lost their crowns, but their blood flowed on through generations. Their traditions carried quietly in the hearts of those who refused to forget. In time, the jungle claimed what was left. Trees grew tall over the temples, roots coiled around the broken altars, and the songs of birds replaced the cries of warriors. The gods returned to silence, perhaps weary of the noise of men. Centuries later, when explorers stumbled through the dense green and found the ruins, they could scarcely imagine that these overgrown stones had once held an empire of such brilliance and faith. They found carvings of kings whose names no one could read, masks whose eyes seemed to follow, and temples that pointed still to the stars. The fall of the Maya was not a single moment, but a slow fading, a candle burning low, leaving behind the scent of smoke and memory. Power, like the jungle, always reclaims itself, and perhaps that is is the lesson the Maya left behind, that no throne lasts forever, that even gods must sleep, and that the earth, in its patience, outlives every empire. As the night settles once more over the ruins and the wind whispers through the trees, it is easy to imagine the distant echo of drums, the faint flicker of torchlight, the murmur of prayers carried by the breeze. The kings are gone, but the spirit of their world lingers, not in power or glory, but in the quiet rhythm of time, the eternal heartbeat of the earth that remembers them still. Before kings and wars, before temples rose to touch the clouds, the Maya believed there was only silence, a vast, endless darkness waiting for creation. From this silence, the gods shaped the world, not with thunder or fire, but with thought and patience. They molded the mountains, called forth the waters, and scattered the stars like seeds across the sky. But something was missing, a being who could speak the names of the gods, who could offer gratitude, who could remember. Their first attempts failed. From clay, they shaped figures that crumbled with the rain. From wood, they carved bodies that walked but felt nothing, their hollow eyes staring blankly into the world. And so, the gods destroyed them, sweeping them away in a great flood. Then, in a moment of divine inspiration, they turned to maize, the sacred plant that gave life to all. They ground its kernels, mixed them with water, and formed flesh from dough, breath from steam, spirit from sunlight, and thus humanity was born. The Maya called themselves the people of corn, for within each person flowed the same essence that fed the world. Maize was more than food, it was identity, ancestry, and destiny. Every field planted was an echo of creation itself. Every harvest a renewal of the covenant between man and God. From the moment a seed touched the soil, rituals began. Priests offered prayers, families burned incense, and the farmers watched the horizon, reading the sky like scripture. The cycle of maize mirrored the cycle of life, birth, growth, death, and rebirth. The stalk rose toward the heavens, golden and strong, just as the soul sought wisdom. When it fell, it returned to the earth, feeding the next generation. The Maya calendar, too, revolved around these rhythms, mapping not only the movement of stars, but the turning of the seasons and the flow of time itself. To live was to move in harmony with maize. In the cool mornings, farmers walked barefoot through the dew, whispering thanks to the earth beneath them. In the evenings, the scent of roasted corn filled the air, mingling with the smoke of hearth fires and the sound of distant drums. Even in their myths, maize linked the worlds. The gods who created it lived in the underworld, and each grain carried a spark of the divine. To eat was not a simple act of survival, but a sacred communion, a reminder that every meal was a gift from the gods who had given their own essence to form humanity. And so, when the Maya looked at a kernel of corn, they did not see a crop, they saw themselves. The yellow grain was their skin, the white their bones, the red their blood, and the black their dreams. To be Maya was to belong to the soil, to rise and fall with the harvest, to live not apart from nature, but as part of it. Even now, centuries after their temples fell silent, the people of the Maya lands still honor the maize. They plant it with reverence, tell stories beneath the stars, and whisper prayers that have not changed in 1,000 years. The gods may be quiet, but their gift endures, growing again and again with the dawn, turning, breathing like the earth itself. Every season, every harvest, every sunrise was part of a great rhythm that bound heaven, earth, and underworld together. They called it the sacred cycle of growth, and within it lay the secret of both life and death. The maize plant was its symbol, its story, and its teacher. When the seed was pressed into the soil, it was buried like a body, placed in darkness so that it might be reborn. The earth was not a grave, but a womb, nurturing what slept within. The rains came like blessings, each drop a whisper from the gods. And slowly, the first green shoots pierced the soil, trembling beneath the sun. This was the season of promise, the renewal of life that had once been offered in sacrifice. The farmers walked among their fields in silence, feeling the pulse of the land beneath their feet. Every stalk that rose carried the hopes of a family, a community, a people, and yet they never forgot that growth required balance, that too much sun could scorch, too little rain could starve. So they prayed to Chalk, the god of rain, with offerings of smoke and song. When thunder rolled across the mountains, they listened not with fear, but with gratitude, for it was the voice of life itself answering their prayers. The Maya calendar tracked this rhythm through sacred intervals. The planting and harvest festivals were not mere labor, but acts of devotion, connecting human hands to divine order. During the festivals, music filled the air, flutes, drums, and conch shells blending with laughter and chant. Women ground corn on stone matatas, shaping it into tortillas and tamales that carried the essence of the gods into the body. The smell of roasting maize rose like incense, a holy fragrance of nourishment and memory. Children learned that each kernel they ate was a gift returned, a small echo of creation renewed. The sacred cycle was also reflected in their temples and art on the walls. They painted scenes of maize gods rising from the underworld, their bodies wrapped in leaves and jewels, their faces serene and eternal. In these images, death was never an ending, only a turning, a descent before another rise. The Maya understood what many civilizations forgot, that to live in harmony with the world, one must move as it moves, change as it changes. They built their lives around patience, faith, and rhythm. They did not fight the seasons, they listened to them. And when the harvest came, it was celebrated not as triumph, but as gratitude. The fields turned golden, the air filled with the hum of life, and under the soft glow of twilight, families gathered to give thanks. The maize was ground, cooked, and shared, and the people sang softly as night fell. In those moments, surrounded by the warmth of firelight and the scent of earth, they felt the presence of their ancestors, those who had planted before them, those who would be remembered in turn. The sacred cycle of growth was more than agriculture. It was philosophy. It reminded them that everything, joy and sorrow, birth and death, beginning and ending, existed in the same eternal circle. To live was to understand that no season lasted forever, and yet every season returned. And as the stars turned slowly above the sleeping fields, the Maya closed their eyes in peace, knowing that tomorrow the world would begin again. To the Maya, the story of the maize god was not simply a myth, it was the soul of existence, the eternal reminder that life was born from death, and that every harvest will require descent into darkness before rising again into the light. The maize god, known by many names, but most often called Hun Hunapu, was the beloved child of the earth and the heavens. He was the golden stalk, the promise of rebirth, the beating heart of creation. Yet his journey was not one of ease, but of sacrifice. The ancient texts tell how he descended into Xibalba, the underworld, a realm of shadows ruled by gods of decay and fear. There, he faced trials meant to destroy him, rivers of blood, houses of darkness, halls of knives and fire. The lords of Xibalba sought to humiliate and break him, to end the cycle of life forever. And for a time, they succeeded. The maze god was struck down, his head severed and hung in a tree that bore strange fruit, the first calabash, round and shining like the sun. But death, in the Maya understanding, was not the end. From his sacrifice came creation. His spirit lingered in the earth, and from his buried body the first corn sprouted. When his twin sons descended after him, heroes born of his essence, they faced the same trials, outwitted the lords of death, and finally brought their father back from the darkness. His resurrection marked the turning of time, the renewal of life after loss, the eternal truth that light must fall to rise again. The Maya saw this myth reflected everywhere, in the maize fields that died each dry season and were reborn with the rains, in the journey of the sun that sank each night and returned at dawn, in their own lives marked by struggle and renewal. The maize god was in their food, their rituals, their very breath. During ceremonies, priests dressed as him, their bodies painted gold, their heads crowned with green leaves to symbolize new growth. Offerings of corn, cocoa, and flowers were laid upon stone altars. The scent of copal. The people prayed not for wealth or victory, but for balance, for the maize god to awaken once more and bless the soil with his strength. The story also carried a quiet lesson about humility. Even the gods could fall, even the brightest light. It reminded the Maya that suffering was not punishment, but transformation, that through loss came wisdom. As the villagers told the tale beside their fires, children listened, wide-eyed, hearing in the rhythm of the words, the same rhythm that beat in their own hearts. For they, too, were the children of maize, born from the God who had died to give them life. And when the rains came, soaking the earth and calling the seeds to wake, the people felt the maize god stir beneath their feet. He rose again with each new dawn, his green arms stretching toward the sky, his golden head shining in the sun. The myth lived on, not as memory, but as truth. To plant was to honor him, to eat was to remember him, to live was to continue his journey through the endless circle of birth, death, and rebirth. In the hush of twilight, when the last light faded and the frogs began to sing, the Maya whispered prayers of gratitude for the maize god, for the underworld, and for the endless cycle that bound them all together in the gentle hands of time. When the season of harvest finally arrived, the Maya world awoke in celebration. The long months of labor, the prayers whispered to the rain, the careful tending of the fields, all came together in one grand moment of gratitude, known as the feasts of life and renewal. The air was thick with the scent of roasted maize and copal smoke, a perfume that mingled with the laughter of children and the soft beating of drums. The villagers gathered beneath the open sky, their faces painted in bright colors, their garments woven in patterns of sun and corn. At the center of the plaza, altars were raised, adorned with fresh flowers, cacao, and the first golden ears sacred dialogue between humanity and the gods. They did not feast to indulge. They feasted to give thanks, to renew the invisible thread that bound them to the forces of nature. The rituals followed the ancient calendar, aligning with the paths of stars and the cycles of rain. Offerings were made not only to the maize god, but to all who sustained life, the earth beneath their feet, the rivers that carried water, the animals that shared their world. The people believed that if they honored these forces, the world would continue in harmony. As dusk fell, fires were lit around the plazas, their glow flickering on the carved faces of temples. The music deepened, slow and hypnotic, as dancers moved in circles, mimicking the motion of the sun and the flow of time. Feathers shimmered, bells chimed softly, and the rhythm of drums echoed like the heartbeat of the earth. The elders told stories of creation, their voices low and steady, weaving memory into myth. Children sat close, their eyes reflecting the firelight, listening to the tale of how mankind had been shaped from corn dough by hands unseen. Food was shared freely, tamales wrapped in leaves, steaming pots of chocolate, and thick tortillas made from the first harvest. Each bite was taken with reverence, each taste a reminder of the God's gift. It was said that during these feasts, the spirits of ancestors walked among the living, invisible but near, drawn by the scent of maize and smoke. Offerings were placed at the edges of fields and doorways, a few kernels of corn, a sip of chocolate, a whispered blessing. In this way, the living and the dead shared the same table, united by gratitude. The night grew long, but the people did not tire. The stars turned above them, tracing slow circles in the sky. And for a few brief hours, the world felt perfectly balanced. The Maya knew that hardship would return. Drought, hunger, and loss were never far, but tonight, none of that mattered. Tonight, they were children of the gods, part of the sacred cycle that would turn forever. When dawn finally touched the horizon, its light spilled across the fields like liquid gold. The smoke from dying fires curled gently upward, and the people stood in silence to watch the sun rise. It was a quiet promise that life, though fragile, would always begin again. The feasts of life and renewal were not just a celebration of the harvest, but of the eternal truth that bound the Maya to the world, that gratitude is what keeps the heart of creation beating, and that even in darkness, the light of maize will always return. Long after the last drums faded and the fires of the harvest feast sank into ash, the promise of maize lived on, a quiet pulse beneath the soil, a heartbeat within the land itself. To the Maya, maize was not simply food or crop, but the eternal link between all things, the earth and the sky, the living and the dead, the past and what was yet to come. Even in the stillness of the dry season, when the fields lay empty and the wind moved like a whisper through the bare stalks, there was no despair, only waiting. The people knew that within each kernel of maize slept a world entire, a future ready to awaken. They called it the sacred seed, the divine spark that never truly died. To plant it was to believe, to hope, to renew. And so, year after year, generation after generation, they placed those small golden seeds into the soil with the same reverence as a prayer. The Maya calendar turned endlessly, its days and years repeating like the rows of maize that stretched toward the horizon. Every sunrise was the beginning of a new story, every sunset a return to the first spirit of maize. It lived in the humble fields, tended by hands that had never forgotten the old songs. In the laughter of children playing among the stalks, in the women who ground corn at dawn, their rhythmic movements echoing the heartbeat of time. The eternal promise of maize was not just that it would feed the body, but that it would remember the soul. In every grain rested the memory of creation, the gods who had shaped humanity from its dough, the ancestors who had kept it alive, the countless lives sustained by its golden light. It bound the Maya to the universe in a way few other beliefs could, tangible, cyclical, eternal. When the rains fell, they saw the maize god returning. When the fields grew tall, they saw the faces of their ancestors smiling in the leaves. The simple act of eating was an act of communion, each meal a quiet ceremony connecting the living to the divine. Even today, across the lands once ruled by mighty kings, that connection remains. Farmers still greet the sunrise before planting, still whisper blessings to the earth. Elders still tell the stories of the first creation by firelight, their voices soft, their words old as rain. In villages hidden beneath the green canopy of the jungle, the same humble rituals continue, not for power or empire, but for remembrance. For the Maya understood something that modern hearts often forget, that eternity is not in the monuments we build, but in the seeds we plant. The temples may crumble, the thrones may fall, but the maize grows again, year after year, defying time. And as long as it grows, the story of humanity, their story, will never truly end. The wind that moves through the fields carries the same whispers heard 1,000 years ago: gratitude, patience, faith. It tells those who listen that life is fragile, yes, but also unending, that death is only another kind of planting, and that one day all that falls shall rise again. As the sun sets over the quiet land and the sky burns gold, the stalks of maize shimmer like living light, and the earth itself seems to breathe in contentment. The Maya may have vanished into the folds of history, but their promise endures, a promise written not in stone, but in the living, growing heart of the world. In the silence of the jungle, where the roots of trees clutch at ancient walls and vines creep across forgotten temples, the Maya still speak, not with voices, but with symbols carved into stone. Their language, once alive with sound and rhythm, lingers in the quiet grace of glyphs, hundreds of intricate signs that told the stories of gods and kings, births and deaths, victories and prayers. Each symbol was a universe in miniature, carrying layers of meaning that no single word could ever hold. To read them was to enter the mind of a people who saw the world as both physical and spiritual, a place where time folded back upon itself like the petals of a flower. The Maya called their writing Tzeb, meaning not only writing, but also painting. For to them, words were art, and art was memory. Every stela, every codex, every painted wall was a living record of the dance between heaven and earth. On the great stone monuments that still rise from the forest floor, one can trace the stories of dynasties long gone, kings ascending their thrones beneath the gaze of the gods, queens performing sacred bloodletting rituals, priests marking the passage of time in celestial cycles. These carvings were not meant to be read quickly. They were meant to be contemplated, felt. The lines curve and spiral like vines, each glyph connecting to another, a living web of meaning that stretched across centuries. Even their keepers of this sacred language were among the most respected in Maya society. Trained from childhood, they learned to paint the thoughts of gods with brushes made from animal hair, to grind pigments from flowers, minerals, and ash. They wrote upon amatal bark paper codices, folded like the wings of birds, filled with color and symbol. These books were delicate yet eternal, carrying knowledge of medicine, prophecy, astronomy, and myth. To hold one was to hold the memory of creation itself. But time, relentless as the jungle, grew jealous of their beauty. When the world changed, when foreign ships came on the horizon and fire followed faith, much of this knowledge was lost. The flames consumed hundreds of codices, their smoke rising like lost prayers into the indifferent sky. Only a handful survived, fragile as breath, their pages scattered across museums and monasteries, far from the land that birthed them. Yet the stones endured. They could not burn, and their silence became their salvation. For centuries, they stood beneath moss and root, patient, waiting for someone to listen again. And in time, scholars learned their song. Piece by piece, the old language awoke, its syllables soft, its rhythm steady, its spirit alive once more. Today, when we trace those lines with our eyes, we are not just reading words, we are hearing echoes. We are listening to the whispers of scribes who wrote by torchlight, two kings who wanted to be remembered, two people who refused to let time erase them. The jungle may have swallowed their cities, but it could never silence their language. It lives still in the curves of the glyphs, in the rhythm of rain upon stone, in the quiet certainty that words, like seeds, can sleep for centuries and still bloom again when touched by understanding. To the Maya, time was not a number to be counted. It was a being to be honored, a cycle that breathed and moved with the universe itself. They did not imagine the past as gone or the future as distant. All moments lived together in the endless circle of existence. Their world was measured not in hours or minutes, but in sacred days, each one carrying its own name, its own spirit, its own purpose. The priests who watched the heavens and marked these days were called the keepers of time, wise men and women who carried the heartbeat of the cosmos within their calendars. In the still hours before dawn, they climbed the steps of temples to watch the horizon, waiting for the first flicker of the morning star or the slow rise of the sun. With each alignment of light and shadow, they read messages written not in ink but in sky and flame. Their two great calendars, the Tiso-kan, a 260-day ritual count, and the Hab, a 365-day solar year, interlocked like gears of a great cosmic machine. When their cycles met, forming a span of 52 years, the Maya called it the calendar round, a sacred renewal of time itself. To the keepers, every day was alive. Some days brought luck and fertility, others warned of conflict or decay. Birthdays were not mere dates, but destinies, each soul born beneath a specific combination of divine forces. The priests recorded these alignments, drawing glyphs on bark paper codices, their hands moving in rhythm with chants that had echoed through generations. They believed that by understanding time, one could live in harmony with the gods, to plant at the right moment, to make offerings when the heavens called for balance, to act only when the circle turned toward favor. In this way, time guided every breath, every harvest, every dream. The Maya also measured ages far beyond human memory. cycles they called backtans, each lasting over 394 years. Their calendar did not begin with the birth of man, but with the creation of the world itself, an age of gods and fire. When one Bactan ended and another began, the Maya held great ceremonies to ensure the continuity of existence. For they believed that if the rituals ceased, time itself might falter and the world would dissolve into darkness. Yet, for all their complexity, the Maya did not fear time. They revered it. They saw beauty in its repetition, comfort in its return. Even death was but a turn of the wheel, the fallen becoming ancestors, the ancestors becoming stars. Modern minds once thought their calendar predicted an ending in the year 2012. But to the Maya, it was never an ending, it was renewal, the same eternal promise that guided their lives and their faith. When we look upon their glyphs today, carved deep into stone, we find not doomsday prophecies, but hymns of balance, harmony, and patience. The keepers of time understood something simple yet profound, that life cannot be controlled, only respected, that time does not pass, it circles back, that to live is to be part of an infinite rhythm that neither begins nor ends. As the night gives way to dawn and the stars fade one by one, the temples of the Maya still catch the first golden light in the same way they did 1,000 years ago. Their shadows mark the solstice just as before, silent proof that the keepers of time did not vanish. They simply taught us how to listen to eternity. Long before telescopes or machines, the Maya watched the heavens with eyes sharpened by devotion and wonder. To them, the night sky was not empty space, but a sacred scroll, alive with movement and meaning. The stars were gods, the planets their messengers, and the slow dance of constellations, a cosmic language that told the story of creation itself. The Maya did not simply gaze at the sky for beauty. They read it as one might read a book, recording every motion of Venus, Jupiter, and the moon with astonishing precision. High atop their stone temples, some aligned perfectly with the solstices and equinoxes, they built observatories open to the wind and stars. From these sacred towers, the astronomer priests watched patterns unfold, year after year, cycle after cycle. They saw the rising of Venus as a sign of war or rebirth, the full moon as a whisper from the underworld, the path of the sun as a divine heartbeat guiding all life below. Their knowledge of celestial motion was so exact that they could predict eclipses centuries in advance, chart the solar year with near-perfect accuracy, and map the heavens with mathematics that modern science would not rediscover for 1,000 years. But for the Maya, astronomy was never separate from spirit. It was prayer written in starlight. Every calculation, every observation was an act of worship. The astronomers of the sky were both scientists and shamans, bridging heaven and earth with numbers, ritual, and faith. At night, they traced constellations shaped like serpents, jaguars, and heroes, each figure carrying a story from their mythology. They saw the Milky Way not as distant stars, but as the great celestial river, the path souls followed after death to reach the underworld and rise again. The center of the Milky Way was the world tree, its branches spreading across the sky, its roots reaching deep into the unseen realms. When comets blazed across the night, the Maya took them as messages from the gods, sometimes of warning, sometimes of renewal. These signs signs guided their kings and farmers alike, telling them when to wage war, when to plant, when to pray. The astronomers recorded all they saw on stone and in folded books, their hands moving by the dim glow of oil lamps. In their glyphs, they captured time itself, the turning of the heavens made eternal in paint and stone. To them, the universe was a living cycle. The same stars that watched over birth would one day guide the dead home. When we stand beneath the same sky today, we look upon the same lights they did unchanged, eternal, whispering across centuries. And though the temples crumble and the jungle reclaims the stones, the alignments remain perfect, precise, unbroken. When the sun rises through a temple's window on the exact day of the solstice, we are reminded that the Maya knew the sky in ways we are only beginning to rediscover. Their astronomers were poets of the cosmos, dreamers who mapped infinity with patience and reverence. They did not conquer the heavens, they listened to it. Each dawn, each season, each eclipse was part of a grand rhythm that echoed the beating heart of the earth itself. And in that rhythm, they found peace. The stars, they believed, were not far away. They were ancestors, watching God's breathing, the very thoughts of creation, eternal, shimmering, and endlessly returning. There are moments in history when the light of 1,000 years is snuffed out in a single breath, and for the Maya, that breath came in the form of fire. When the foreign ships appeared on the horizon and the strangers stepped onto their sacred shores, the world the Maya had built over millennia began to tremble. These newcomers did not come seeking knowledge. They came carrying their own gods, their own truths, and their own fears of what they could not understand. To the Maya, the codices, those delicate books of bark and ink, were living things, voices of their ancestors, records of stars, medicine, and the divine. But to the conquerors, they were seen as heresy. One by one, the sacred texts were gathered into piles beneath the open sky, and with a single torch, centuries of wisdom turned to smoke. The priests who once guarded these books could only watch in silence as their gods, their stories, and their science curled into ash and drifted away on the wind. The fire crackled like laughter, cruel and final, as symbols that had survived storms and time vanished in moments. Only for codices are known to have survived that terrible night. 4 fragile pages that carry the weight of a civilization's soul. The rest became memory, a ghost of ink and flame. The silence that followed was heavier than the smoke. The Maya, who had once written the language of the cosmos, could no longer speak it. Their temples stood mute, their observatories empty, their scribes gone. Yet even in loss, there was dignity. In hidden villages deep in the jungle, whispers of the old world endured fragments of ritual songs, prayers disguised as stories, knowledge passed in secret from elder to child. The flame had devoured the paper, but not the spirit. The Maya learned that silence, too, can be sacred. They carried their faith not in books, but in memory, in maize, in the stars that still shone above. When the invaders left, the land remained. The jungle grew thick again, wrapping the ruins in green arms, protecting what was left. And beneath that green silence, the stones still spoke. Their glyphs, half pierced by time, waited patiently for the world to listen once more. Centuries later, when archaeologists stumbled upon those ruins and brushed away the vines, they found not just carvings, but resurrection. Each symbol carved in stone became a deciphered word, a rekindled flame. Slowly, the lost voice of the Maya began to rise again, faint but clear, like the first light after endless night. The tragedy of the burning was not the end of Maya wisdom. It was its transformation. The knowledge that could not be written found new life in the breath of stories, in the quiet persistence of a people who refused to vanish. Fire had silenced their words, but it could not erase their meaning. And so, even now, when the wind passes through the ruins of Palenque or Tikal, it carries a faint murmur, not of sorrow, but of survival. The fire may have stolen their books, but it could not consume their soul. For every flame dies in time, and from its ashes, memory is born anew. Though the great cities of the Maya have long since fallen silent, though the codices have turned to ash, and the temples sleep beneath the green hush of the jungle, the mind of the Maya has never truly vanished. It lingers, subtle and patient, in the quiet spaces between the modern world's noise, in the whisper of the wind through the ruins, in the patterns of the stars above, in the soft rhythm of corn rustling in a distant field. Their wisdom endures not as relic or ruin, but as a living presence woven into the land itself. The descendants of the Maya still walk those same mountains and valleys, still speak the old languages, still plant by the same stars their ancestors once charted. In their stories, the gods still rise and fall. In their prayers, the maize god still breathes. Though centuries of conquest and change have passed, their memory flows like an underground river, unseen, but always there, nourishing the roots of who they are. The world around them has changed. Yet the ancient logic of the Maya, the idea that time is circular, that life and death are partners, that knowledge lives beyond the written word, still shapes their way of seeing. In this, the Maya achieved something rare and eternal. They built not only cities of stone, but philosophies of endurance. The monuments crumble, yet the thought that built them remains whole. Even now, as archaeologists decipher their glyphs and scholars rebuild their calendars, we are only beginning to understand the depth of their vision. The Maya mind saw the world as a single living organism, sky, soil, water, and spirit bound together in balance. They measured not for domination, but for harmony, not for control, but for understanding. To them, the stars were not distant, the gods not abstract, the earth not inert. Everything was alive, and everything was connected. Perhaps that is the greatest echo they left us, a whisper urging us to remember that wisdom is not lost when written words fade, that truth can survive without temples, and that silence itself can hold memory. When the sun sets over the jungles of Yucatan and shadows stretch across the carved faces of old kings, the world seems to exhale. The night comes alive with the same chorus of insects, the same shimmer of fireflies, the same eternal constellations the Maya once named. In that stillness, if you listen closely, you might hear it, the pulse of an ancient mind still dreaming beneath the stars. It does not speak in language, but in rhythm, the rhythm of rain on leaves, of footsteps on earth, of breath against time. The Maya did not vanish. They became part of the world itself. Their thoughts live in the soil, their stories in the wind, their wisdom in the patient turning of the seasons, and perhaps in the quiet moments before sleep, when you close your eyes and drift into the vastness of your own thoughts, you touch something of that same eternity, the calm life is a circle, that all things end only to begin again, and that the voices of the past still whisper softly